So this opened in the summer of 1941. That mural out there was painted. I'll tell you a little bit about that later. It was all ready to, all done and had a grand opening, and then had to close for a few years because everything got diverted to the war effort. Anyway, this is completely wrong. In 1941, they thought we came over from the Great Lakes region. Maybe they thought that because it's known that the Sioux did. Turns out that we came down from the Alaska area through a province of Canada called Alberta, because there were glaciers here, here, and here, but there was an ice-free corridor where people could come down, and we arrived here between 14 and 15,000 years ago. So that means that my family's lived here for 500 generations. Unless your family is also Indian, your family hasn't lived here for more than 10 at the most, maybe 8. So we've actually been here for 500 generations. Turns out, based on all sorts of recent archaeological digs, that the North America, Central America, and South America all had Indians in them 14 to 15,000 years ago. And that wasn't thought to be the case when I was your age. But that's not where they found the oldest DNA. They found it on the Olympic Peninsula in Washington. I know something about that because I have a farm there. They found it in caves in eastern Oregon, and they found it as a river crossing in Idaho, and then they found it right where you're standing, and then they found it down in Texas. That was a few years ago. Now they found it all sorts of places. So it's coming into a much clearer picture that people did in fact come across from Asia about 18,000 years ago, drifted down here, and by 14, 15,000 years ago, they were pretty much everywhere. Here's something I bet you don't know. There's 574 tribes in America, in the United States. There's 630 in Canada. In the United States, 574 tribes, only fewer than 20 of them are buffalo tribes. And yet that's what everybody pictures. The reason you don't know very much about us is because only 1 out of 100 Americans are Indians that belong to a tribe. But only 1 out of 200 Americans are Indians that belong to a tribe and live on a reservation. And all the big reservations with all the big tribes are in the middle of the country. So, and very few people will ever step foot on one, because you might come here because of Glacier Park. You might go to the Navajo Reservation because of Grand Canyon. Well, why would you ever go through Pine Ridge or Standing Rock or Rosebud Sioux or Northern Cheyenne or Crow or Assiniboine or Gros Ventre or Belknap or Peck or Rocky Point or Wind River and so on and so forth? You just wouldn't. They're not on the way to anywhere. Okay, now I'm going to tell you something that you're never going to forget. In the old days, if you were, the old days meaning before any Europeans came, just Indians, and you looked across and you saw another band of Indians that you didn't know who they were, then you hoped 3 things. You would hope they weren't Plains Apache, you would hope they weren't Comanche, and you'd hope that they weren't Blackfeet. Because out of those 574 tribes, with only 20 or fewer tribes that are buffalo hunters, and those are the ones that fought the Indian War, those are the people you just don't want to fight with. Even among that rough and tumble group, there's only 3 that were predatory tribes. 3 were raiders. 3 were like Vikings. The difference between the Blackfeet, the Comanche, and the Plains Apache is that the same between them and all the other Indians is the same as the difference between a polar bear and a grizzly bear. If you ever see a polar bear, that's the last thing you'll ever see. They'll run straight at you and they'll eat without hesitation. That's all they think about, food. You see a grizzly bear, 99% chance you'll be okay. Unless there's bear cubs involved, or it's an old male with bad teeth who's starving, they're probably going to leave you away, leave you alone. But if you ever see a Blackfeet, you just hope you can get away. Now, I'm not bragging about that. I'm not saying that's a good way to be, but for whatever reason, there were just 3 tribes that were predatory on all the other tribes. That's one of the reasons that we're one of the very few tribes in the United States that's on their original homelands. Out of 574 tribes, only 6 are on their original homelands. The Blackfeet, the Crow, the Seminole, the Navajo, the Pueblo, and I'm probably forgetting one. The reason we were allowed to stay right where you're standing is that during the reservation era, where they created a series of, you call them reservations, they were actually internment camps. They had barbed wire around the edges of them. You couldn't leave until 1910, 1909, 1911, depending on the reservation. And we weren't even U.S. citizens until 1924. We couldn't vote until 1924. The blacks got the vote right after Civil War. We didn't get it for another 50 or so years. Anyway, point is, we couldn't leave we couldn't leave our reservations, and they were created in such a way that there was a lot of passage in between them, so the wagon trains could come through. By the way, this is mostly after the Civil War. So anyway, right where you're standing, the reason they let us have our reservation right here, because our place of creation is only 14 miles that way, it's right still in this world, is this has always been our base, and we had about a 300-mile half circle that was our raiding range, and came right against the Comanches here, right against plains. So we kind of divided up the middle of the country in terms of which section we terrorized. The reason they let us be right here is that, you know, Blackfeet, you can stay right where you are. Nobody likes you anyway. Stay right where you are. And wasn't that fortunate that we got to stay right where our place of creation is. If you want to know our place of creation story, you can read it in this adjacent to the parking lot. There's a bunch of metal sculptures here. You can read about our creation story. So anyway, that's stuff you probably didn't know. Now, you know we've been here for 15,000 years, but when you think of Indians, you think of horses, you think of detailed beadwork, you think of guns. Well, that's only been the last few seconds of our life, because we didn't get horses till 1750. We didn't get the small beads that you do detailed beadwork until 1840. All Indians got them at the same time. Every single bead in this museum, and there's hundreds of thousands, well, there's millions if you include upstairs what's in storage. Every single bead came from Europe through an English, French, or American trader or trapper. Every single bead. As soon as we saw those small beads, that's all any tribe wanted. And that was the basis of the fur trade, and that was the basis of beadwork. Of all the things that a trader and trapper could take into the wilderness to get the maximum number of pelts, of furs, for the least amount of weight carried in, that would be beads. Certainly wouldn't be skillets or rifles or, blacksmith anvils or anything like that. It was beads. So, you know we've been here for a long time, but all the stuff you picture in your mind about Indians are only a small number of tribes. I said one out of 100 Americans belong to a tribe, 1 out of 200 are Indians living on reservations. They're all in the middle of the country, that's why you almost never run into them. Only 1 out of maybe 2,000 Americans are a member of a buffalo tribe, such as me, and such as anybody else that you meet in this that lives here. Just by the way, so you see, you're in a place that almost nobody ever comes, and you're going to see things almost nobody ever sees. So it's worth remembering. For example, the Smithsonian Institute's the biggest museum system in the United States, and probably the best in the world. And 4 people came to visit us from the Smithsonian 5 years ago. They stood there and talked to me for a little bit, and they turned around after we were done talking. They were all Indian, by the way, because they worked at the Indian Smithsonian. They were Dene, though, Navajo, same as my children. And when it was time for them to go through, they said, look, we've been hearing about this museum for a long time. What we hear is just impossible stuff. People must be making it up. They said, we just wanted to see. They stood there and talked for a while. Then they turned around and they figuratively fell to their knees and gasped. They said, oh my God, is that original? They were looking at the guy in the white. They said the Smithsonian has nothing like this, not even close to that. And in fact, that's true. You'll never see anything like the guy in the white. It was made in 1880. It looks like the day it was made. Every single aspect of it is as good as has ever been made and ever will be made. The cobalt beads, the perfect eagle feathers, the ermine, the human hair. And I'm not going to tell you how we came by it. From the war bonnet. That leather, that deer leather, is like velour, and it's snow white. It's called brain tan, and you never see leather that's snow white. It's usually a cream color. Everything about that makes it the best items of clothing that have ever been made. And what's extraordinary is it's all on the same piece, and it looks like the day it was made. So you should look at that, because you'll never see anything like it again. Now, before we got beads, we used something else to make these little detailed patterns. There's examples of horse masks. There's little medallions there. Those are called porcupine quills, and that's what we used for thousands of years. On this reservation, we have 10,000 people living. 9,700 are Indians, almost all Blackfeet. That means we have 10,000 people that know how to bead. Only 3 people still quill. It's very much a lost art. So now that you know that, I want you to look at 2 other things that you've never seen before, never see again. On the other side over here, there's a war shirt, like this war shirt right here, except that one's beaded. That's probably the only quilled war shirt you'll ever see in your life. And it looks like the day it was made. And that day could have been 5,000 or 10,000 years ago. Nothing really changed in the design of the material. And finally, on the other side here, on this side though, the other side of this wall, there's some plexiglass, and there's two moccasins, sort of a peach-colored moccasin. Go up and look really closely at the porcupine quills on them so you can gauge how big they are. And they're about the size of a stalk of wheat, flattened out. Then look 12 inches to the right. Look closely at it. It's baby porcupine quills. And when first time I saw it, I just had to rub my eyes and get closer, and I said, that's not even possible. No one can make something like this. Well, yet there it is. But no one will make it again because there aren't any left. Anyway, you'll see what I mean when you get close to it. You won't believe any human could make that. Make yourself at home. Let me know if you have any questions.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Jeez. That's good. Yeah. Yeah, it is.